She didn't plan to read that verse. She had opened her Bible at the graveside because her hands needed something to hold. The service was over. The people had gone. The flowers were still bright against the dark earth. And she was standing there alone, and she did not know what to do with herself. So she opened the book, and her eyes fell on a line she had read 100 times before, and this time, something happened. Something broke open. You have probably been there, or you will be, because grief is the one experience that does not ask permission. It does not wait for a convenient season. It does not knock politely and wait in the hall. It comes through the wall. And when it does, the things we thought would hold us, our plans, our strength, our explanations, they scatter like paper in wind. But there is a book that does not scatter. There is a book that was written by people who had already been where you are. People who had sat in the rubble of everything they loved and somehow, found words. Not comfortable words. Not easy words. Words forged in the actual fire of loss. Today we are going to look at 7 of those verses. The ones that have carried millions of people through the worst moments of their lives. Not because they explain grief. Grief cannot be explained. But because they enter it. They sit down beside you in it. And they refuse to leave. We are going to begin with a man hiding in a cave. His name is David. And he is not doing well. The year is roughly 1000 BC. David has been anointed as the future king of Israel. But the current king, Saul, has heard the rumors and decided he would prefer David dead. So David has fled. He has run to a Philistine city called Gath, and it has not gone well there either. The Philistines recognized him as the man their people sing songs about. So David, the man who killed Goliath, the man who led armies, has resorted to pretending to be insane. He scratched marks on the city gates. He let saliva run down his beard. He convinced the Philistine king he was not worth killing. And then he ran again. He ended up in a cave called Adullam. And there, in the dark, surrounded by men who were in debt and distressed and bitter, a ragtag army of the desperate, he opened his mouth and sang. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. That is Psalm 34, verse 18. And you need to understand the context to feel the full weight of what David is saying. He is not writing this from a palace. He is not writing it from a season of prosperity. He is writing it from a cave, from hiding, from the lowest point of a life that had already known extraordinary loss. He is writing it as a man who knows that God showed up, not to fix the situation. The situation was not fixed. Saul was still hunting him. The dead men in the cave were still broken. The future was still uncertain. But in the middle of all of that, in the dark, in the rubble, in the cave, David had experienced something he could not explain away. The Lord was close. The Hebrew word here for close is karev, and it does not mean nearby in a passive sense. It carries the image of a person who draws near on purpose, who moves toward you, who does not wait for you to get yourself together before approaching. Karev is what a parent does when a child is inconsolable. You don't stand at a distance and call instructions. You move. You close the space. That is what David is saying God did. In the cave. In the worst moment. God closed the space. And here's what most people miss about this verse. David wrote it in the past tense, but he placed it in a poem designed to be sung in the present. By anyone who needed it, in any cave, in any century. He wrote it for you. There is a verse in the Gospel of John that is famous for being the shortest verse in the Bible. 2 words, 11 letters. And yet those 2 words have done more work in more hospital rooms, more gravesides, more dark nights of the soul than almost any sentence ever written. Jesus wept. John 11, verse 35. You know the story. Lazarus, a man Jesus loved. A man described 3 times in a single chapter as someone Jesus loved specifically, by name, has died. Jesus receives word that his friend is sick, and he waits. This is the part that troubles people. He waits 2 days. He lets the situation get worse. He lets Lazarus die, and then he goes. When he arrives in Bethany, the town is in mourning. Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. Martha comes out to meet Jesus, and she says, plainly, without softening it, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That is not a statement of faith. That is grief talking. That is the raw, unfiltered voice of a woman who loved her brother and watched him die and had believed, truly believed, that Jesus could have prevented it. And Jesus does not rebuke her. He does not say, Martha, you need to trust the process. He does not explain the theological purpose of the delay. He does not manage her grief from a distance. He asks her one question. He walks with her to the tomb. And then, surrounded by mourners, standing in the full weight of human loss, Jesus, who knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, who had the power to end the mourning in the next 60 seconds, wept. Stay with me. This is one of the most important moments in all of Scripture for anyone who has ever wondered whether God understands what you are going through. He does not weep because he has forgotten the plan. He does not weep out of helplessness. He weeps because grief is real, because loss is real, because the love that Lazarus' sisters had for their brother was real, and the pain of losing him was real. And Jesus, fully God and fully human, entered that reality completely. He did not hover above it. He did not process it from a theological distance. He stood in the dirt of human loss, and he wept. Eusebius, the 4th century church historian, writes that John, the apostle who recorded this moment, lived to be extraordinarily old, and in his last years, when he could no longer walk, and was carried into the church at Ephesus, he would repeat one sentence over and over: "Little children, love one another." John had seen the full sweep of human suffering. He had watched every one of his closest friends die for their faith. He had been exiled, and the thing that stayed with him, the thing he could not stop saying, was love, because he had seen what Jesus did at that tomb, and he never got over it. Now, there is a book in the Old Testament that most people have never read all the way through. It is 5 chapters long. It was written by a man sitting in rubble. His name is Jeremiah, and the rubble around him used to be the city of Jerusalem. The year is 586 BC. The Babylonian army has destroyed the city. The temple, Solomon's temple, the dwelling place of God among his people, has been burned to the ground. The people have been taken into exile. Jeremiah is one of the few left behind, sitting in the ash of everything his nation had built over centuries. And he writes. The book is called Lamentations. And in the middle of it, right in the middle, chapter 3, verses 22 and 23, in the darkest book of the Old Testament, surrounded by language of grief so raw it is almost hard to read, Jeremiah writes the line that would later become one of the most beloved hymns in Christian history. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. You need to feel where that is coming from. This is not a man writing from comfort. This is not a theologian composing a hymn in a quiet study. This is a man in the ruins. Literal, physical ruins, and he is choosing, deliberately, against every circumstance that surrounds him, to speak about the faithfulness of God. The Hebrew word for compassions here is rakamim, and it shares a root with the word for womb. It means a love that is not earned, not conditional, not based on performance. It means a love that is as natural and inevitable as the love of a mother for the child she carried. And Jeremiah says, those compassions are new every morning. Not new because the old ones wore out. New the way the sun is new each morning. Not a different sun, but the same faithfulness. Arriving fresh, unreduced, undiminished by whatever happened yesterday. Whatever happened yesterday. This is what has carried people through grief for 26 centuries. Not an explanation, not a reason. A presence, a faithfulness that shows up at the tomb, that sits in the rubble, that moves toward you in the cave. The man who wrote the 8th chapter of Romans had been beaten with rods 3 times. He had been shipwrecked 3 times. He had spent a night and a day in the open sea. He had been stoned and left for dead in the street outside a city called Lystra. He had been imprisoned more times than he could count. He had been hungry, cold, and without shelter. He had watched men and women he loved die for their faith. He had written letters to churches from a prison cell, in chains, with no guarantee that he would ever walk out. His name was Paul. And from inside all of that, from inside a life that grief had visited over and over, he wrote what many scholars consider the greatest passage in all of his letters. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 8, verses 38 and 39. Pay attention to this. Paul is not speculating. He is not offering a philosophical position. He is a man who has been tested at every point on that list. Death, life, the present, the future, and he is reporting back from the field. He is telling you what he found. He found that the love of God does not detach when things get hard. It does not loosen its grip when you are drowning. It does not become thinner or more distant when the grief arrives, when the diagnosis comes, when the phone rings in the middle of the night. Neither death nor life. He starts with death, because that is where most people expect the love of God to run out. Surely death is too final, too permanent, too absolute. Surely in death, the connection breaks. And Paul, who had watched people he loved die, who himself was awaiting a death sentence, says, no, not even death, not even that. The Greek word Paul uses for convinced here is papismai, and it is the perfect passive tense. It means, this is a conviction that was formed by something that happened to me, and it has remained in place ever since. Paul is not performing faith. He is describing a settled certainty that came through suffering, not around it. And here is the remarkable thing. This passage has been read at more funerals than perhaps any other in the New Testament. Not because it makes death easier. Death is not easy, but because it tells the truth about what death cannot do. It cannot separate. That word, separate, is chorizo in Greek. It is the same word used in Jewish divorce proceedings. Paul is saying, there is no force in the universe, in the seen world or the unseen world, in time or beyond time, that can legally, finally, permanently divorce you from the love of God. Grief may come. It will come, but it does not come alone. Now I want to take you to a valley. Psalm 23 is the most recognized poem in the history of human literature. There is not a close second. It has been translated into more languages than any other passage of Scripture. It has been read at the deathbeds of kings and the gravesides of paupers, in stone cathedrals, and in hospital rooms, in languages that did not exist when David first sang it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We know these words. We know them so well that sometimes we stop hearing them. So I want to take you to the line that most people glide past, the one that is the gravitational center of the whole psalm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Notice what David does not say. He does not say, even though I walk around the valley. He does not say, even though I avoid the valley. He says through. The valley is on the path. The shadow is real. The darkness is real. And David is not pretending otherwise. But here's the part nobody tells you. The Hebrew phrase translated shadow of death is tsamaveth. And some scholars believe the original meaning is closer to deep darkness, a darkness so thick it feels like death, a darkness where you cannot see your own hands in front of your face. David is not necessarily talking about a literal near-death experience. He is talking about the kind of grief that takes the light out of the world, the kind of loss that makes ordinary daylight feel wrong somehow, the kind of sorrow that is so heavy it becomes its own kind of darkness. And in that darkness, in the valley, David says the thing that changes. It is not the circumstances. The valley is still there. The shadow is still there. What changes is the language. In the first 3 verses, David speaks about God in the third person. He makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores. God is the subject of the story. Then, in verse 4, something shifts. You are with me. Not he. You. David stops talking about God and starts talking to him. Because in the valley, in the real darkness, in the actual loss, the distance collapses. The theology becomes personal. And the word David uses is not near. It is with. Imad in Hebrew. Present. Alongside. In the valley. In the dark. Not waiting at the other end. With. There is a word in the New Testament that gets translated as blessed, and we have heard it so many times that it has lost its edge. Makarios. That is the Greek. And it does not mean what we usually mean by blessed. It does not mean comfortable. It does not mean fortunate in the way we use that word, as in, fortunate that things worked out. Makarios is a word that the ancient Greeks used for the gods, for beings who existed in a state of deep, settled, interior happiness that circumstances could not touch. It meant a kind of flourishing that was not on the surface. And Jesus, standing on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee, looking at a crowd of people who were almost certainly grieving something, said this: "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Matthew 5, verse 4. This is one of the most counterintuitive statements in human history. Not blessed are the successful. Not blessed are the ones who kept it together. Not blessed are the ones who grieved quickly and recovered efficiently. Blessed are those who mourn. Here is what I want you to see. Mourning, in the Hebrew and Greek world, was not a private, interior experience. It was visible. It was loud. Mourning was tearing your garments. It was sitting in ash. It was refusing to be comforted until comfort was real. Mourning was the refusal to pretend that loss was acceptable. And Jesus says that people who mourn like that, people who refuse to minimize, who insist that loss matters, who sit in the full weight of it, those people are macarious. Why? Because they are in touch with something true. Because grief, at its deepest level, is a form of love. You cannot grieve what you did not love. The depth of the grief is the measure of the love. And Jesus is saying that people who love that deeply, who lose that fully, who mourn that honestly, they are not failing at faith. They are living it, and they will be comforted. The verb there is passive. It will be done to them, not by them. They do not need to comfort themselves. They do not need to manufacture peace. It will come from the outside, from the one who wept at the tomb of his friend, and who has never since stopped moving toward the brokenhearted. Now I want to take you to the end. Not the end of the story we tell, the end of the story. The Apostle John is old. He is the last of the 12 disciples still alive. Every one of his friends has died for their faith. Peter, crucified upside down. James, beheaded. Thomas, speared to death in India, according to Eusebius. Andrew, crucified. Matthew, martyred. John has outlived them all, and now he is on an island called Patmos, a volcanic rock in the Aegean Sea, used by the Roman Empire as a place to exile dangerous people who were too well known to kill quietly. He is in his 90s. He cannot walk. And one day, on that black volcanic rock, a vision begins. And in the last pages of that vision, in the last chapter of the story, John sees something. He sees a new heaven and a new earth. He sees a city. He sees a throne. And he hears a voice, the loudest, most authoritative voice in the universe, say this: "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. For the old order of things has passed away." Revelation 21, verse 4. And this is where everything comes together. This is the answer to every grave, every hospital room, every 3 in the morning that has no words. Not that grief does not happen. It happens. It happened to David in the cave. It happened to Jeremiah in the rubble. It happened to Mary and Martha at the tomb. It happened to Paul in the prison and to John on the island and to every person who has ever opened a Bible. At a graveside with shaking hands and not known what they were looking for. But it does not end there. The God who closes the space, who moves toward the broken, who weeps at tombs, who sits in the ash and still calls himself faithful, that God has written the last page. And on the last page, he does something that no human hand can do. He wipes the tears, personally, with his own hand. The Greek verb here is exalipho, and it means to wipe out, to erase completely, to blot out entirely. Not to dab at, not to acknowledge, to erase. Every tear, not most tears, not the reasonable ones. Every one. C.S. Lewis, after the death of his wife, wrote that grief felt like fear. He wrote an entire book about the chaos of it. The randomness, the way it ambushes you in grocery stores and at unexpected songs on the radio. And at the end of that book, after all the honesty, after all the darkness, he arrived at something. He called it a door that swings open when you stop trying to force it. The God who said, "I will wipe every tear," was not making a vague promise about a far-off future. He was describing the destination of a journey that begins right now, in the cave, in the rubble, in the valley, at the graveside, in the dark. Now watch what happens next. We have walked through 7 verses today. Psalm 34, verse 18. God closes the space in the cave. John 11, verse 35. God enters grief. He does not observe it from a distance. Lamentations 3, verses 22 to 23. Faithfulness that arrives fresh every single morning. Romans 8, verses 38 to 39. Nothing in the universe can make that love let go. Psalm 23, through the valley, not around it, and never alone. Matthew 5 verse 4, mourning is not a failure of faith, it is an act of love. Revelation 21 verse 4, the last page has already been written, and it ends with a hand that wipes away tears. These are not 7 random verses. They are not a collection of helpful thoughts assembled by a religion trying to manage difficult emotions. They are dispatches, reports from the field, written by people who were in the dark and found that the dark was not the last word. Here are 3 things I want you to take with you. First, grief is not the opposite of faith. It is faith being honest. Every person we have looked at today, David, Jeremiah, Martha, Paul, John, grieved. They wept, they complained. They sat in rubble and wrote lamentations. Not one of them was rebuked for it. Not one of them was told to be stronger, to trust more, to feel less. They were met. They were entered. They were held. If you are in a season of grief right now and you have been telling yourself that stronger faith would hurt less, I want you to hear this clearly. Jesus wept. Grief is not the absence of faith. Sometimes it is the purest expression of it. Second, God does not explain grief. He enters it. This is the pattern across all 7 verses. He does not send a theological explanation down from a distance. He does not dispatch a reason. He closes the space. He weeps. He shows up in the cave, in the rubble, in the valley, at the tomb. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever the loss is, whatever shape the darkness takes, the God of these pages has already moved toward you. The question is not whether he is near. Karif, he is already near. The question is whether, in the middle of the darkness, you will let yourself be found. Third, the story is not over. Every graveside we have ever stood at is a middle chapter, not the last one. Every tear cried in the dark has been seen and counted and kept. The voice that said, Lazarus, come out, is the same voice that said, I will wipe every tear from their eyes. That voice has never broken a promise. Not once. In 4,000 years of human history. In the lives of every person whose story is in this book, it has not broken a promise. And it will not break this one. Now, I want to return to where we started. That woman at the graveside. Her hands around a Bible she had opened because she didn't know what else to hold. Her eyes falling on a verse she had read 100 times. She is every woman, every man, every person who has ever stood at a grave with shaking hands. She is your grandmother. She is your friend. She is you, maybe, on a day you don't like to think about too much. She opened the book and something broke open. And what broke open was not her faith. It was the door that swings open when you stop forcing it. And what came through the door was not an answer. It was a presence. The kind that David felt in the cave. The kind that Jeremiah felt in the rubble. The kind that Mary felt when she heard her name spoken at an empty tomb on a Sunday morning she was not expecting. She held the book. The verse held her. And she was not alone. If this video helped you today, please share it with someone who is walking through a hard season. Subscribe if you want to go deeper into the stories that have sustained people through the darkest chapters of human history.